In 1960, archaeologists found a Neanderthal buried with flowers and declared it proof that when our extinct cousins lost someone they loved, they grieved. But 60 years later, scientists went back and found something that put the theory on trial. So did Neanderthals really mourn their dead? Or did we just want them to? We're going to walk through the evidence, the flowers, the bodies, the bones that survived, and let you be the judge. The story starts at Shanidar Cave in the Zagros foothills of Iraqi Kurdistan. Between 1951 and 1960, archaeologist Ralph Selecki pulled 10 Neanderthal individuals out of that ground, a haul nobody had ever matched in one place. But the find that changed everything came near the end of the dig. Selecki's team uncovered a Neanderthal-numbered Shanidar 4, curled on his left side in a partial fetal position, somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years old. In the soil packed around his bones, the samples held clumps of pollen from several different flower species. Pollen in a cave isn't strange on its own. Wind, water, and animals carry it in constantly. What was strange was the pattern. It sat in concentrated clumps right around the body, the kind of spread you'd expect if someone had laid handfuls of flowers on a grave. Selecki's reading was bold. He argued Neanderthals had buried their dead on a bed of wildflowers, proof of grief, maybe even ritual and religion. He published the claim in Science in 1975, working from soil samples a palynologist named Arlette Leroy-Gourhan had studied in a lab far from the cave. It landed like a thunderclap. Neanderthals had spent most of the 20th century typecast as brutish and incapable of symbolic thought. The flower burial cracked that image open, and it became the iconic Neanderthal find, the one piece of evidence everyone pointed to when they wanted to say these weren't just cavemen. Quick ask before we go further. Subscribe if you want more evidence-driven history like this. 1. Now, back to the story. But here's the part nobody talks about. The entire case rested on one reading of pollen in dirt, with no clearly dug grave and no skeleton laid out in a way only a burial could explain. That's soft evidence, the kind where you read meaning into a pattern and hope the meaning is really there. And for decades, almost nobody had the tools or the reason to go back and check it. So the question of whether Neanderthals could grieve hitched itself to one fragile reading of soil samples, a dangerous place to anchor an idea about another species' inner life. Therefore, the case needed proof that didn't depend on someone's interpretation of a pattern. And wobble it did, but not for another 40 years. The check finally came in 2023. A team led by Chris Hunt, a paleontologist at Liverpool John Moores University, went back to the pollen evidence with modern eyes, alongside Emma Pomeroy and Tim Reynolds. Their paper, wryly titled Shanidar et ses fleurs, asked one simple question. Was that pollen really left by mourners, or did something else put it there? What they found rewrote the story without burning it down. The pollen clumps sat in concentrated pockets, the exact pattern you get when burrowing bees and rodents drag pollen into their tunnels, not the fairly even sheet you'd expect from flowers laid across a body. The most likely explanation wasn't grief. It was bioturbation, the slow churning of dirt by creatures that had no idea a Neanderthal lay beneath them. That sounds like a demolition. But the team never said Neanderthals lacked care for their dead. As The Guardian put it, the bees may be the source of the pollen, but the evidence still suggests the bodies were buried with care. In other words, the flowers were probably never real, but the burial probably was. Selecki got the ritual wrong, and the respect right. This wasn't a takedown, it was an upgrade. The softest piece of evidence got pulled out of the case, which forced the whole field onto harder ground. You test a claim, it bends, and you go find something that doesn't. But there's a catch. If the flowers were gone, the most famous evidence that Neanderthals had feelings was gone with them. A skeptic could now argue the entire mourning case was built on wishful thinking. The icon was down, and nothing had replaced it yet. Therefore, the only way to save the question was to find evidence that didn't depend on interpreting pollen at all. It meant going back into the same cave and looking at the bodies themselves. And the cave still had one more body sitting there, half hidden by the original dig, waiting for someone to look again. In 2016, a new team clearing out Selecki's old backfill at Shanidar Cave found hand bones in the trench wall, leading to a rib cage 7.5 meters below the modern floor. It took until 2018 to excavate from above, work that stretched into 2019. What they pulled out was the first articulated Neanderthal skeleton unearthed in over 20 years. They named it Shanidar Z, and the lead researcher, Dr. Emma Pomeroy of the University of Cambridge, published the find in Antiquity in 2020. Articulated means the bones were still in their correct anatomical position, the skull near the shoulders, the ribs in order. A body only stays that intact if it was covered quickly after death, before scavengers could pull it apart. And this is where the case ties back together. Shanidar Z lay directly adjacent to where Selecki's team had cut out the Shanidar 4-flower burial block in 1960. They almost certainly carried off Shanidar Z's lower half with it. This body belonged to the same unprecedented cluster as Shanidar 4, 6, 8, and 9. Not a random outlier. What makes Shanidar Z harder evidence than the pollen ever was comes down to the dirt itself. Under a microscope, the sediment around the bones was darker than the sediment beneath the body, meaning someone covered her with material from elsewhere. Below her, a natural water channel appeared intentionally deepened. You're not reading meaning into scattered grains anymore. You're looking at a body in a dug depression, covered with different dirt, left intact. Pomeroy's take is measured. The completeness and articulation point to a body covered quickly and deliberately. For the first time in this case, the evidence doesn't depend on interpretation. It depends on dirt and bone. But even a deliberate burial only proves they hid the body. It doesn't prove grief. A group that leaves a corpse lying around invites scavengers and disease. So disposing of it is practical. Burying someone can be hygiene, or it can be love. The bones alone can't tell you which. Therefore, the only way to tell grief from hygiene is to look past the grave entirely at the bones of people who never needed a funeral to prove they were loved. That's the strongest evidence in this case. Not how Neanderthals treated the dead, but how they treated the living. The records call him Shanidar I, but everyone called him Nandi. Pulled from the same cave in 1957, the Smithsonian dates him to between 45 and 35,000 years ago. His skeleton reads like a medical file. Early in life, he took a crushing blow to the head. It likely blinded his left eye and damaged the part of the brain controlling his right side, leaving a withered right arm and a crippled right leg. A 2017 Washington University study, led by Eric Trinkhaus, found he'd also gone deaf. Every injury shows signs of healing. None of them killed him. This is a man who couldn't see out of one eye, couldn't hear, couldn't use his right arm, and walked with a bad limp. Yet he lived to roughly 35 to 45 years old. Old for a Neanderthal. The Smithsonian's own conclusion is blunt. He probably couldn't have survived without the care of his social group. Someone fed him and protected him for years. He wasn't the only one. In 1908, near La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, workers found the first relatively complete Neanderthal skeleton anyone had seen. The Old Man, with severe tooth loss and degenerated joints who likely needed his food softened and daily help to survive. How much he truly needed is debated, so hold this one more loosely than Nandy. But the pattern is the same. People who shouldn't have survived, surviving anyway, because someone chose to keep them alive. And that reframes the entire question. This is grief that doesn't need a ceremony, or flowers, or a grave. Keeping a blind, deaf, crippled man alive for years costs the whole group. Calories they could spend on a healthy hunter. Safety they give up slowing down for him. You don't pay that cost for hygiene or convenience. You pay it because losing him would cost something you're not willing to spend. But even here, care and grief aren't the same word. Keeping someone alive proves attachment. It doesn't prove they mourned when that person finally died. The bones show devotion, but they don't show a funeral. Therefore, the strongest proof of grief might not be a grave at all. It might be sitting in the last place anyone thought to look. So the case wasn't as closed as it looked, because right now, in a cave in Israel, it was still moving. In March of 2025, a study landed in Nature Human Behavior from Tin Shemet Cave in central Israel, the first published research ever done on the site. It was led by Yossi Zaidner of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, alongside Israel Hershkovitz of Tel Aviv University. The finds date to roughly 100,000 years ago, when Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens shared the same corner of the world. The team's reading is that the two groups didn't just coexist, they interacted, sharing stone tool technology, daily routines, and the way they buried their dead. The burials at Tin Shemet were flexed bodies, curled on their right side, with customs that looked the same whether the body was Neanderthal or sapiens. The site also held ochre, the red pigment people used on bodies and objects on purpose. Why that changes the frame is simple. It's no longer just did Neanderthals mourn like us, the question we've been asking since 1960. At this date, in this place, they may have been sharing mourning customs with us, side by side, in the same ground. The line between their ritual and ours starts to blur. But hold this one carefully, the way you hold any open finding. Assigning a specific body to Neanderthal versus sapiens at that date is messy work, based on fragmentary remains, and shared customs is an inference from how similar the burials look, not a label stamped on each skeleton. Therefore, treat it as a working finding, not a closed verdict. The case is still open, and the evidence keeps getting stronger, not quieter. Maybe the flowers were never the proof. Maybe the proof was a group that kept a blind, deaf, crippled man alive for years, for no reason except that they didn't want to lose him. Love proven not by a ritual at the end, but by every ordinary day before it. If that isn't grief, we don't have a better word for it. If this case changed how you see Neanderthals, subscribe. The next mystery is already open.